All right. So, in this section's lectures, we're going to talk about English colonization and their rivalry with Spain. Now, by the end of the 16th century, England comes to dominate the New World, despite the fact that the Spanish basically had a 100-year head start. England was pretty jealous. They eyed the enormous wealth that Spain had gotten, and the Protestant Reformation had really shaken England. But Elizabeth I assumed the English crown in 1558, and she oversaw what was known as the Golden Age of English expansion. It included both the expansion of trade and exploration, and also literary achievements by people like Shakespeare and Marlowe. And it's important to remember that Elizabeth oversaw the Golden Age of England. It was her. Mercantilism, which is basically state-assisted manufacturing and trading, created and maintained the markets that they had, and the markets provided a steady supply of consumers and laborers, and it stimulated economic expansion, and it increased English wealth. However, the social and economic changes really unsettled the English population. The island's population increased from fewer than 3 million in 1500 to over 5 million by the middle of the 1600s. The skyrocketing price of land also coincided with plummeting farming income. Rents and prices rose, but wages pretty much stagnated. Movements came about in England to enclose public land, and that was really sparked by the transition of English landlords from agriculture to livestock. And so they evicted tenants from the land. They created hordes of landless, jobless peasants that pretty much just kind of roamed the countryside. In fact, 1/4 to 1/2 of the population came to live in extreme poverty during this time. New World colonization also won support in England during a time of rising English fortunes among the wealthy, the Spanish rivalry, and of course that internal social unrest. But supporters of England colonization always touted more, economic gains than mere self-interest. They really did claim to be doing God's work, right? Many claimed that colonization would glorify God and England and Protestantism by Christianizing the New World pagan people. People like Richard Hakluyt the Younger and John Dee, for instance, drew upon something called the History of the Kings of Britain, which was written by the 12th century monk Geoffrey of Monmouth. And it basically, it was the mythical account of King Arthur's conquest and the Christianization of pagan lands. And they used this to kind of justify American conquest. Promoters also promised that the conversion of the New World natives would satisfy God and glorify England's Virgin Queen Elizabeth I, who was seen as pretty much as almost divine by some in England. The English, they imagined themselves, superior to the Spanish, who really were still suffering from that black legend of inhumane cruelty. And the English colonization supporters argued that, they had to prove that they were superior. So in his 1584 Discourse on Western Planting, Richard Hakluyt amassed the supposed religious and moral and exceptional economic benefits of colonization. He repeated the black legend of Spanish New World terrorism and attacked the sins of Catholic Spain. And he promised that English colonization would strike a blow against the Spanish heresy and bring Protestant religion to the New World. He also he suggested that they might provide the only salvation from Catholic rule in the New World. He said it offered obvious economic advantages. Trade and resource extraction would really make English rich, but they could find plentiful materials to outfit a world-class navy there as well. Moreover, he also said the New World would provide an escape for England's vast armies of landless, peasants. If they expanded trade, he argued, they would bring profit, but also provide work for the jobless poor people in England. And so really it's he's selling it as like a Christian enterprise, as a blow against Spain, as economic stimulus, and a social safety valve. This very noble rhetoric kind of veiled the coarse economic motives that brought England to the New World, though. These strategies and new merchant class really paved the way for colonization. And while England's merchants lacked a state, they had plans to build lots of wealth. By collaborating with new government-sponsored trading monopolies, they employed some really financial innovations like joint stock companies, and English merchants sought to improve on the Dutch economic system. Spain was extracting enormous material wealth from the New World. Why shouldn't England, right? And so these joint stock companies, which are basically the ancestors of modern corporations, became the initial instruments of colonization. With government monopolies and shared profits and managed risk, these really money-making ventures could attract and manage a huge amount of capital that would be needed for colonization. So in 1606, James I approved the formation of the Virginia Company, which he named after Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen. Rather than formal colonization, though, the most successful early ventures into the New World were this form of state-sponsored piracy known as privateering. Okay, and Queen Elizabeth really sponsored sailors, or what they called sea dogs, like John Hawkins and Francis Drake. She paid them to plunder Spanish ships and towns in the Americas, and they earned huge profits for themselves and the English crown. And so England practiced piracy on a scale that really transformed crime into politics. I mean, Francis Drake, he harried Spanish ships throughout the Western Hemisphere. He raided Spanish caravans as far as the coast of Peru. In 1580, he was awarded with knighthood because he was such a good pirate. And Elizabeth really kind of walked a fine line, but the Protestant Catholic tensions were really running high, and the English privateers really provoked Spain. The tensions got even worse when they executed Mary, Queen of the Scots, who was a Catholic. And in 1588, Philip II of Spain unleashed the Spanish Armada that had 130 ships, 8,000 sailors, 18,000 soldiers, and they tried to launch the largest invasion in history to destroy the British Navy and get rid of Elizabeth. So England goes to war with Spain, right? And as an island nation, England really depended on a robust navy to be able to trade and have territorial expansion. And they did have fewer ships than Spain, but they were smaller and they were faster, and they really did a good job of harassing the Armada and forcing it to retreat. And then this crazy fluke storm shows up that England kind of remembers as the divine wind, and it annihilated the Spanish Armada. This destruction of the Armada really changed the course of world history. It saved England and secured English Protestantism, but it also opened up the seas for English expansion and paved the way for their colonial future. So by 1600, England stood really on the brink of dominance over North America. But their colonization would look a lot different than the Spanish or French. They'd been trying to conquer Catholic Ireland, and rather than integrating the Irish and trying to convert them to Protestantism, England just seized their land through violence and then pushed them out, leaving them, to move elsewhere or just to die. And it's pretty much the same tactics that they're going to use in North America. English colonization was pretty rough at the beginning, though. You have a guy named Sir Humphrey Gilbert. He labored throughout the 16th century to establish a colony in Newfoundland, but he failed. In 1587, with a predominantly male cohort of 150 English colonizers, a guy named John White reestablished an abandoned settlement on North Carolina's Roanoke Island. Here's the problem. Supply shortages prompted White to return to England for additional support. But about that time, the Spanish Armada showed up, and they mobilized British naval efforts, and he gets stranded in Britain for several years. When he finally gets back to Roanoke, everybody was gone. And they couldn't even find trace of them. They did find the word Croatan carved into a tree in the abandoned colony, and histories presume that the colonists, who were probably short of food, had fled to a nearby island and encountered the native population there, and they also think that maybe the natives just killed them all. Either way, the English colonists at Roanoke Island were never heard from again. So that didn't go very well. Elizabeth I dies, and there are no English colonies that are permanently in North America. And so by 1604, King James I really kind of goes and makes peace with Spain. He says we won't use privateering anymore. And so colonies began again as the new urgency. The Virginia Company, which was established then in 1606, drew inspiration from Cortez and Spanish conquest and hoped to find gold and silver and other valuable trading commodities, like glass or iron or furs or pitch, anything that the country could supply. This company planned to identify a navigable river with a deep harbor that was away from the eyes of the Spanish, and that's where they would try and find a native trading network that they could use to extract a huge fortune from the New World. Okay, and that's going to lead us into that first true English settlement in Jamestown in our next lecture. Thanks.